This evening's host is no less a person than Mrs. Marsha Bailey Owings. Marsha is a gifted individual who has a passion for service and children. Mrs. Bailey Owings is a holder of a Bachelor in Science, works with minors in social work with a minor in psychology and social policy. At the postgraduate level, Mrs. Bailey Owings holds a master's degree in social work with specialization in administration and management. Her career began in the public sector in the area of family intervention, moving on to child protection. As a social work professional, Mrs. Bailey Owings has managed social service agencies and social workers in the public sector. Mrs. Bailey Owings' social work experience ranges from clinical intervention to social work management, policy formation, and human resource management. Mrs. Bailey Owings is the founding member of the Caribbean Women Honor and Empowerment, Trinidad and Tobago chapter, and has served as Vice Chair and Social Service Director for the past 5 years. Welcome, Mrs. Bailey Owings.
Good evening. Thank you, Mrs. Cormina. It is good again to be here for day 3 of our 16 days of activism.
Tonight's speaker is no less a person than our chair and director, Miss Wendy H Lewis. Her character is bold. Her God-fearing spirit converts a room. Charismatic, humble, and chosen for such a time like this. Miss Wendy H Lewis is an author, certified protocol officer, corporate trainer, mentor, motivational speaker, radio and television host, and communications and management strategics, who owns and manages the Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Training Academy, formerly the Trinidad and Tobago School of Protocol. Ms. Lewis has attained a wide range of experience over the years, stemming from the banking industry in the UK to major international projects such as the London Olympics 2012, Summit of the Americas 2009, and Shogam Commonwealth Head of Government meeting in 2009. Ms. Lewis' academic qualification includes Information Technology from Thames Valley University in the UK, Masters in Business Administration from the Anglia-Ruskin University in the UK, and Protocol Certification from the European School of Protocol. Ms. Lewis has served in the public sector as the Chief Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Entertainment Company and the Protocol Officer in the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Patrick Manning. The Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Training Academy offerings include communications and emotional intelligence. As the chair and district manager of the Caribbean Women Honor and Empowerment Trinidad and Tobago chapter, Ms. Lewis' skill set is an asset to the organization, its members, and the women and girls we as an organization are mandated to serve. Ms. Lewis has proven to be and is an accomplished professional, skilled and thorough researcher, articulate communicator, all-round achiever with strong business acumen, focused, resourceful, multitasker, who is spiritually grounded with a high motivation to success. Ms. Lewis was recently ordained as a minister by a prominent bishop, Apostle Dr. Dexter James of the Warriors Assembly, Growing Church, Breakthrough Ministries International. Let's welcome our director, Ms. Wendy H Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kwamina. Good evening, Mrs. Bailey Owen, and everyone. Welcome to day 3.
Yes, thank you, Adeline. And so what was forgotten out of all of this great introduction is that she has also been my sister friend. I no longer use the term best friend. She has been my sister friend for the past, and I would not say how long, Wendy, because then people
don't say give away our age.
No, we won't say the age at all, but it is indeed an honor. I feel humbled to be doing this interview this evening. Tables have turned.
Tables have turned.
One of the things we want to talk tonight about is communication. And as a social worker in any setting, when we deal with whether it's a victim, a survivor, or a perpetrator, communication sits at the center of it. So yes. I want to ask Wendy, as we begin, how do you see communication and just in light of the gender-based violence, how do you see communication and the role of communication in this area?
Well, first of all, communication is supposed to be a two-way street. So I believe that when we're looking at gender-based violence, we have a lack of communication. And one of the reasons I see the lack of that communication, there's a fear factor. There's a fear factor across the divide, across the entire spectrum. So there's a fear factor. So let me deal with the victims first, because they could be in the position that they're in why they're not communicating effectively because of cultural upbringing. It could be because of religion. It could be because of ignorance, which is lack of knowledge. So without knowledge, people perish. And this is literally what has been happening to our sisters, our friends, and our girls. And one of the things that I say is, you can't act out what you don't know. So a lot of times, we as a people, we communicate ineffectively by the blame game, by being judgmental. So you hear of a GBV situation, which is gender-based violence for those on the platform. And the first thing you say is, why didn't she run? She stayed all these years. Why didn't she run? But she doesn't even know how to walk. Far more run. And how do you run when you barely could walk? And can she speak to somebody? Can she tell somebody? Can she confide in somebody? How do you confide in someone when you grew up in an environment where as a woman, you're supposed to remain silent?
Correct.
Do you speak to when you were born quiet and you were groomed to be quiet, and you've been told, and you've been in a very closet environment, you haven't even, some of these people haven't even been exposed to a primary education for a start, to say, well, what you miss at home, you could pick up in school. Some of these people have not even had the privilege of attending school. How do you then, and then you're married at a young age, you've been told the man is the head of the home, and rightfully so, but then they take that out of context based on what you know as an individual. So that's the communication side from the victim perspective, which is why a lot of victims remain in their state, because they don't know how to communicate. And even when they do, there's that fear factor. And then we have the perpetrators now, male and female, they act out what they've been through. So you grew up in an environment where you yourself have been abused. And then they say to the perpetrator, but when all of this was going on in your head, couldn't you speak to somebody? Even if you grew up without parents, or you grew up without somebody to guide you along the way, there must be a leader in the community that you could speak to. But then the leader is the perpetrator.
Correct.
So you end up, the perpetrators now in a losing battle, literally. So you're in a place where you have these communication issues between the victims, between the perpetrators. And then I want to expand the communication again to the various stakeholders, whether that be CSOs, whether that be the Ministry of Gender, whether that be the TTPS, UN, whoever they are. They're all doing great stuff, every single unit that I've mentioned and plus. But sometimes we have individuals that aren't aware of the information. So then we have to now communicate again. And we have to recognize that there are different types of communication: verbal, non-verbal, oral, written. And you have to then do an assessment of the area of the people that you're trying to communicate to and communicate effectively so that you hit target. I think over the years we've been pouring out information, but we haven't been hitting target. And I think that that's where one of the challenges are.
Excellent, excellent. So what would be, based on what you have just articulated, with, so there's the victim, there's the survivor, there's the perpetrator, and then there's the stakeholders. What would be your recommendation for us to improve all forms of communications so that, you know, we eliminate or try to at least reduce the number of persons who are exposed to violence?
I think one word that will cover all three, victims, perpetrators, and stakeholders, will be one of the major communication skills: listening. To listen more. Sometimes even in the home, you might have a child that is going through some form of abuse. And the child, you come home from work, just a scenario, and the child says, "Mommy, I need it." Not right now. I just had a long day at work. And you dismiss that child. But that is when that child in her mind is ready to share the story, because children are not adults. We could pick and choose our emotions and we could manage it more effectively. But when a child is ready to speak, a child is ready to speak.
Correct.
And then we dismiss that child. So we need to be able to listen more. And even when we're going out to the different communities to gather information, because information gathering is key. That's where you pick up the problems. And when you pick up the problems and the issues, you're then able to formulate the solutions and go forward. So we need to listen more. We need to go out to the rural areas. We need to have more communication initiatives taking place where you can hear the voice of someone. And you can't listen if you're speaking.
Yes, that's correct.
You really have to zip it and come out of self, because it's not about you, it's not about us, it's about what this other person has to say. You may have heard it, and we've been through it, Marsha. I remember there was an era where we were just getting calls by the 5, 6 a day, because we were on radio and people were just pouring in with calls, and we had to manage it effectively. And when you get one call and you get another one right after, you can't be, "Oh gosh, a next call." So the thing is, you have to have the heart for it.
Yes,
We've been talking about this for years. The passion has to be there. And I'm grateful that we have a board of directors, and every single one on the board, we're passionate about what we do. And we really want to create change and impact lives. And if you're doing it with the right purpose in mind, you will be able to break barriers and create the paradigm shift that is needed across the board. We have to change the mindset of individuals. We have to change the mindset of the stakeholders. Even if, so for example, you're doing a major project that includes victims, perpetrators, etc., and you're looking for a communication specialist. Honestly, your degree is irrelevant to me. Your degree is irrelevant. Your master's is irrelevant. All that theory is irrelevant, because at this point in time, whilst the knowledge that you may have gathered from your studies may be of importance, what is of paramount importance is your connectivity to the people you are going to connect to. You have to be able to feel their pain. You have to be able to understand them from a different level. You have to be able to do that without critique. It's not about you and your story. It's not about what you would have done. It's what they did based on the tools that they have. Yes. You can't tell somebody, I have to go back to that line. You can't tell somebody run if they don't even know how to stand.
Correct.
So you understand what I'm saying? So this communication thing, I think it's a key component of this 16 Days of Activism series, because I believe that is one of the areas that we need to nurture it a little bit more, and we need to implement it deeper. We need to, because we have to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is people are being victimized daily, people are being abused daily, and what is the root cause? They know that they're being abused. How do they get out? How do they communicate that transport? That transportation vehicle that needs to take them out. Who communicates that? I mean, I was in ministry and somebody asked me, Minister Wendy, I need to ask you a question. I have a client who needs to get to a shelter. Where can they go? And I had to explain. I know where the shelters are because, I mean, you and I have visited these shelters. But that's not how you disseminate the information. So I had to guide them through the process to say that the victim has to go to the police station. They have to make a report. When they make the report, whether it's the gender-based violence unit or even a normal police station, they will then make contact with the shelter and escort them to the shelter. So something as simple as that, communication.
Exactly. But you know, you touched on something just now. When persons would say, you know, why they don't get out, why they don't leave. It speaks to, and it was something that Mrs. Manning spoke to last night, awareness.
Yes.
And when she said it, you know, it rang in my head something that we always banter about, and we heard, you know, every year there's this buzzword. It's something that they call emotional intelligence. Because if you understand, if you don't understand who you are, how you think, how you feel, what is your, even people talk about in relationship, when we talk about communication, your own language, what you use, you know, then you are susceptible to all manner of abuses. So talk a little bit, Wendy, about emotional intelligence. What is that, and why is it even important?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, emotional intelligence is the ability to control, express one's emotions in a strategic manner. And I deliberately put this up on the screen so that I can walk people through the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. And you were so on point when you connected what Mrs. Manning said last evening as it relates to self-awareness, because that is the first pillar of emotional intelligence. You have to be aware of who you are. And if you're in an environment as a victim and you're being told all the negative things under the sun, that's not going to help you. You have to understand your strengths. You have to understand your weakness and how often your actions affect each other. You have to be able to better to understand and handle and learn from constructive criticism. Now, the first thing that springs to mind when I even say that is, how do you do all of that from a battered place? How do you do all of this? Better able to understand constructive criticism. How do you do all of that from a battered place? So then you go into self-regulation, where you now have to express emotions with restraint and control, which then means, especially from the victim perspective, you know that let's say your husband is physically abusive. You know the trip wires, which are the things that will trip him off. Whilst you may be right, you have to be able to manage your emotions with restraint and control to avoid getting the next blow.
Correct.
It doesn't mean that, you know, you're giving him the upper hand, you're being wise. And self-regulation is wisdom. You have to be wise, you have to be able to understand. If you know that, I'm not saying you live like a robot, but you just have to find ways to safeguard yourself. And that is part of emotional intelligence. Even with motivation, which is the 3rd pillar, where we have self-motivation, resilience, optimistic, driven by inner ambition. It's easier said than done. Yes. These 5 pillars are nowhere near easy for somebody who's been battered and bruised, because how do you motivate yourself when you don't even know what motivation is? Yeah. You just believe that over the years, this is what I've been dished out, and this is how I've been living, and it is what it is, and you accept. A lot of times when we speak to victims who suffer from gender-based violence on all sides of the divide, it's a spirit of acceptance. Yes. They've accepted it. Well, I've watched my mom take licks for years. I've watched my dad be abused for years. My dad didn't give my mom no money, so that's financial abuse. So you just accept it. So how do you motivate yourself out of something that you've accepted that you shouldn't have accepted? Correct. And then we look at the 4th pillar, which is empathy, which is lacking in society across the board. Somebody comes with a situation, who feels it knows. Yeah. Even though you may not have experienced it, you could show some empathy, some compassion and understanding of human nature. Connect with others on an emotional level. You know, you have some people that say, well, you have a heart of stone. That's not somebody with a heart of stone, you know. That's simply somebody who have some deep-rooted issues that nobody was able to tackle. We've watched so many movies over the years where somebody is angry and violent, and then one statement melts them down because you got to the root of the matter, you got to the core. And then, of course, people skills. people skills. If you don't have people skills, you're not going to go very well with emotional intelligence. You have to be able to build rapport and trust quickly with others. Somebody is trying to speak to you about a situation, you have to be able to have a very open mind. And as I said at the beginning, it's not about you. So we're not into power struggles or backstabbing or any of that. And it's also finally about mutual respect.
Yes.
And I think once we're able to master emotional intelligence and communications together, we're able to, eradicate some of the barriers that currently exist where gender-based violence is concerned.
Thank you. Excellent. And it goes back to what we were talking yesterday about what is introduced in the curriculum. Because
yes,
communication is, we assume that because we can talk.
Yes, you're on point.
We assume that because I know my name is Marsha Bailey, this is who I am, I know who I am, but we don't have the emotional intelligence of how to really use that to our advantage. So just like we were saying that there are certain things that need to be introduced into the curricula, I think I'm strongly suggesting that this is also something that we need to put into the curriculum, because we need to understand, and then it helps create a society where people are, as you said, empathetic. People have a lot more concern. You would be less likely to turn a blind eye if you see persons, going through a situation, because it's not only about me, it's about everybody as the society. So we have a few more minutes before we wrap up, and I also want to try to take some questions. But what would be your closing words, if I were to say that, in terms of talking to a woman who is currently in a situation, or a man or a young girl, and communication, emotional intelligence is something that you wanted to hammer home to them? What would be your last words, parting words to them?
I will take it from a place of self-empowerment, because the fact that that person is in that situation is because they don't really think much of themselves, as Mrs. Manning touched on last evening, that low self-esteem. So I will empower them. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. And if you're speaking to somebody who's already weak and your choice of words is to highlight their weak areas, you're not helping.
Yes.
You're not helping. So I would always find some way, somehow, something in them to bring out their gifts, to bring out the beautiful side. I remember, what I remember, Marsha, when we went to La Brea to sensitize the area after that three-way murder where the guy would have killed the woman and her husband and then killed himself. And I was getting to the root cause of the problem. And I started from a place of gifting. What are you gifting? What you're good at? We're not ready to talk about the abuse yet. Tell me about you and how you can excel. And then people started talking in the room about, well, I'm a hairdresser and I could cook and I could this and I could that. I said, so then you're sitting down on money, man. I'm talking to millionaires in a room. So then they're like, but nobody never told me that before. I thought I was broke and poor. I thought I had nothing. I thought I had to be dependent on the government for a house. I had to be dependent on the government for my food card. I didn't know I was somebody. So from the time you start to empower them, they open up. And that open window is where you slip in. And then you start to say to them, now that you are who you are, and purpose is on the inside of you, and you are ready to hit every target in your life, this is an area that I want you to look at. So you can have a holistic victory. Because right now you're victorious because I just gave you some keys for your finances. I just gave you some keys for you to make some money. I just gave you some keys for you to smile again. But now we want a holistic approach. So let's talk about this, what I'm picking up. By that time, you've already built trust.
Yes.
Because they love you now. You've just empowered them. So they love you. They're talking to you about all sorts. Sometimes they go off topic because they're comfortable. So you have to find them in a place of comfort and empower and motivate them. That's what I would say.
Exactly. So all valuable information. And again, we want to reiterate the importance of not just looking at gender-based violence as just the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, the financial abuse. It is that holistic, because it is at the end of the day, persons involved, and persons have emotions, they have attitudes, they have other systems. You know, in social work, we all talk about systems. So it was good that you highlighted from that mindset, that place of understanding the communications and understanding also who I am and why do I need to understand. So I just want in a few minutes, let me see if I can.
Environment as a victim.
Okay,
In terms of questions.
Yes.
Or you're like me, you're on more than one device.
Correct. Denise Berkeley is saying, yes, she does agree. Communication is key. Yes. A lack of empathy is major. And that was saying good night to one of our directors, Auntie Oslin, as we call her.
Auntie Oslin is on the live, yes.
Yes, she's on the live. And so she's saying, yes, that communication is key and understanding is key. So at this time, we have just four minutes. I just want to be able to ask, do you see us understanding, and I'm going back to this emotional intelligence because it's fascinating to me. Can it be an advantage or disadvantage? Understanding, is there a way to strike a balance? Is it there that you have to have more self-awareness, less empathy? What's the balance that needs to be had? You know, for it to be
balance. The balance is based on your character. It's based on your personal character. So, for example, and I would use us as an example. We like twins, right? So everybody, this like my twin sister. We've been best friends since primary school. So it's a sisterhood here, and we have so much in common. So we bold.
Yes.
We are bold and we speak out naturally. So we are automatically regulated and aware about some things.
Right.
Because of our environment, because of how we were both brought up, we understand empathy because we grew up with nurturing parents.
Correct.
So we have an advantage and we understand emotional intelligence without even knowing that we do. Correct. Someone who understands emotional intelligence and is dealing with someone who doesn't understand emotional intelligence will use what we call emotional blackmail. Because you know that this person is not aware, they're not motivated, they're not recognizing that I have no empathy, I am going to milk them for this. And that is where perpetrators have the upper hand. Right. It's a psychological thing. Yes. That's where perpetrators have the upper hand, both male and female. And even sometimes, and I will tell you this too, even victims use it to they think it's their advantage, but they use it to their disadvantage because they play the victim role when they've already come out of that victim state mentally. But they're using it to receive, whether it's services, whether it's empathy. So victims as well do the emotional blackmail thing.
Thank you. That is good insight. And so the reason I asked it is so that we can reiterate the point of how critical it is for all. And starting at a young age, as Minister would also have articulated on the first day, the importance of giving our children, boys and girls, the necessary information for them to be able to make more informed choices. So at this time, I just would like to invite Mrs. Kwamina and thank you, Wendy, for another.
You're more than welcome.
Day 3.
Thank you.
Over to you, Mrs. Kwamina.
Okay, so we have come to the end of another insightful session. In commemoration of 16 days of activism. CWHE is always at the forefront of activities. Yes. Anytime it comes to women and children, we are very passionate about it and we always support. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening at 6 again for day 4 of our empowerment series. Tomorrow, our speaker will be let me see.
Denise Berkeley.
Miss Denise Berkeley.
She's from Tobago.
She'll share her journey from victory to
victim to victory.
To victim to victory. Yeah, so we look forward to tomorrow. Look forward to our session tomorrow evening with Miss Berkeley. And from the Caribbean Women Honors and Empowerment team, from the board of directors, we thank you for looking at us tonight, for listening in. We will have all the series up so that you can even see it after tonight. You can go on your Facebook and you can look at it. And we are on for 16 days. We are going the distance. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye.